Hi, I'm Joyce. I'm an author and illustrator, as you had introduced. My experience with Pooh, I actually didn't read them as a child myself. My parents are originally from China, and so actually my experiences with was probably more Disney version of Disney-vibed version of Winnie the Pooh. But my parents are from China, and so they didn't. I wasn't really read to by my parents as a child. My memories of books were just actually where my mom would still take us to the library every weekend, and we would actually look at books together and actually just make up stories, and by looking at the pictures and using our imagination. I probably didn't read Winnie the Pooh until maybe later on in life, but it's just amazing, like how relevant a lot of it still is, even as an adult. Like a lot of there's so much wisdom in such endearing, such endearing characters, and there's like a lot of humor too in these books, which I love. I mean, I'm just going to pick a really short part from the book, which I thought was just so cute and just like so just kind of it's really funny. So later on, when they all had said goodbye and thank you to Christopher Robin, Pooh and Piglet walked home thoughtfully together in the golden evening, and for a long time they were silent. When you wake up in the morning, Pooh, said Piglet at last, what's the first thing you say to yourself? What's for breakfast, said Pooh. What do you say, Piglet? I say, I wonder what's going to happen exciting today, said Piglet. Pooh nodded thoughtfully. It's the same thing, he said. So, I love that because I love food, and also, there's just so many wonderful bits of like humor and just littered throughout these books, and I think, if you haven't read it later as an adult, I highly recommend it. I think you almost get this new layer of meaning out of these texts, this great text. So thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I'm George. I'm going to take just a tiny bit longer because I'm going to do a little bit of drawing and I have a story to tell, and I'm also going to do some reading. Also, I just want to introduce, this is my stuffed animal, just named her Sarah. I did a book about a Triceratops where the Triceratops is named Sarah. This stuffed animal actually predates the book, but I mean, it should be, right? So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about one of the side characters of Winnie the Pooh. Like everybody here, I grew up like probably knowing the Disney version first. In fact, my version of Winnie the Pooh I had as a kid was like illustrated with the Disney characters. So I knew those before I knew the Ernest Shepard illustrations, which I've come to like just cherish and love even more. Like every grumpy person in the world, Eeyore was my favorite, and I purposely steered clear of Eeyore today because I thought everyone would do Eeyore. Who would do Eeyore? But there's actually a really kind of poignant story about Roo I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to read. This is the chapter in which Kanga and Roo are first introduced into Winnie the Pooh, and it's called "Kanga and Baby Roo Come to the Forest, and Piglet Has a Bath." We will get to the bath part. Nobody seemed to know where they came from, but there they were in the forest. Kanga and Baby Roo. When Pooh asked Christopher Robin, how did they come here? Christopher Robin said, in the usual way, if you know what I mean, Pooh. And Pooh, who didn't, said, oh. Then he nodded his head twice and said, in the usual way. Ah. Then he went to call upon his friend Piglet to see what he thought about it. And at Piglet's house he found Rabbit, so they all talked about it together. What I don't like about it is this, said Rabbit. Here we, you, Pooh, and you, Piglet, and me, and suddenly, and Eeyore, said Pooh, and Eeyore, and then suddenly, and Owl, said Pooh, and Owl, and then all of a sudden, oh, and Eeyore, said Pooh. I was forgetting him. Here we are, said Rabbit very slowly and carefully, all of us. And then, suddenly, we wake up one morning, and what do we find? We find a strange animal among us. That's capitalized, in case you're wondering. An animal of whom we have never even heard before. An animal who carries her family about with her in her pocket. Suppose I carried my family about with me in my pocket. How many pockets should I want? 16, said Piglet. 17, isn't it, said Rabbit? And one more for a handkerchief. That's 18. 18 pockets in one suit. I haven't the time. There was a long and thoughtful silence. And then Pooh, who had been frowning very hard for some minutes, said, I make it 15. What? Said Rabbit. 15. 15 what? Your family. Well, what about them? Pooh rubbed his nose and said that he thought Rabbit had been talking about his family. Did I? Said Rabbit carelessly. Yes, you and... Never mind, Pooh, said Piglet impatiently. The question is, what are we going to do about Kanga? So the chapter goes on, they actually make this really twisted plot where they're going to kidnap baby Roo and like as a way and like replace like him and like so Kanga would never notice. It's this really funny bit. So now let me talk about myself. In the intro you heard that I do a graphic novel series about Greek mythology, which has almost nothing to do with the adventures of a stuffed bear with very little brain. But when I was in high school, I had learned this is what I wanted to do, and I started making pilgrimages into Manhattan. I grew up on Long Island, where I would visit like these interesting things related to children's literature. Like I made a trip to the Plaza Hotel to see the picture of Eloise that hangs up there. And one of the trips I made was to the Donnell Library, which is the Central Children's Library, where I don't know if you guys know this, and it's not there anymore, it's now the Central Library, but they have the actual Winnie the Pooh. Like Christopher Robin's childhood toys are there. They have Winnie the Pooh, and the real Winnie the Pooh, Ernest Shepard's drawing is this really charming, like hunchbacked kind of creature. And that's kind of what the Disney version gets its nod from. But Winnie the Pooh, the actual toy that Christopher Robin did, is a kind of a standard looking bear. I'm trying to draw this upside down, so it's looking really weird. He's been super well loved. I don't think he's actually smiling, so let's just say. All threadbare and fuzzy. He is jointed, which is like something I didn't know teddy bears could do when I was a kid. I'm like, that's a technology I appreciate. He's certainly not the Winnie the Pooh we think of, but that was the original one. It was really very moving to go and see this when I was like about 16, 17 years old. To see this toy, and you can see the love marks. Piglet is actually this really weird little leather toy that's always flexing. He's in this pose like this, and he's got like pretty sick chest muscles. And he's made of like leather that is cracked, and because he's like 100-something years old, and like he's been held by like tons of children, and Christopher Robin, and like the leather's all cracked and stuff. I don't think he had eyes anymore. I'm not going to draw Eeyore, because Eeyore is held together by this mesh net. He was stuffed with sawdust, just like in the books. He's not doing so well. Who else am I missing here? Tigger, same thing. He's kind of in rough shape. There is no stuffed animal of owl or rabbit. I was disappointed to learn that. They were just made up completely by a mill. They're actually real animals. The other ones are stuffed animals. They don't want to talk about Kanga, because this is the most heartbreaking part, all right? You guys ready? I'm going to be sad guy now. Here's the Kanga. She's the biggest of them, except for maybe Eeyore. I didn't like myself quite enough room. She's got her little arms. Tail comes down. I'm drawing through Pooh. This is the sad part. She has a big, empty pouch that's distended because Roo is missing. Like, this is something, like, in Christopher Robin's childhood, when he really played with this, he lost Roo. So somewhere out in the 100-acre woods, Roo is, like, this missing toy. And that's why it's so interesting that this chapter ends up being about them, like, wanting to kidnap Roo. And I never found out if that's actually what happened, if, like, he wrote this after Roo went missing. But in England, it's actually a game that kids will play, where they go, it's a game called Searching for Roo, where you actually will go out in the woods and you look for this missing Roo. And just for me, I mean, I don't really have a good ending to this because the story ends up kind of sad. It's just like me saying, like, oh, there's Kanga 100 years later, and there's just a big empty spot where her baby was. But I like to think that Roo's having great adventures, right? Roo's grown up. Is there any famous kangaroos that could be Roo? No, there's not. Well, somebody needs to write a book about grown-up Roo, just being like totally successful. That's my sad story, guys. I had a sadder story I didn't even tell, so this is the one that was less sad.
That was really delightful. Does anyone have any Winnie the Pooh related questions for anyone on our panel? Sure.
Well, here's one for Joyce, and one for George, and one for Kevin. Joyce, when was the first time you saw Winnie the Pooh on the big screen?
I don't know if I actually ever saw Winnie the Pooh on the big screen. I mean, we didn't even have cable when we were kids, so I'm like, I can't even remember. But but yeah, but I just remember. So I mean, I would think it's sometime in elementary school. I probably did see it at a friend's house. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember actually.
Okay. And Kevin, if you could name a favorite character who has the same charm and experiences as Winnie the Pooh, who could hang out with your DLF, Gerald the Elephant, what would it be?
If I can, okay. So I'm creating a whole new character who's just like Pooh?
Mm-hmm.
And what would his name be?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, given how Pooh got his name, it would have to be something like Lunch. It would have to be like just a name that everybody understands, that makes everyone feel good, that has a lot of humor and a lot of wisdom in it. But at the same time is a little bit nonsensical. So yeah, I would name him Lunch.
A teddy bear named Lunch?
A teddy bear named Lunch. Sounds
Cool. Now for George. George, you are an excellent illustrator of your graphic novels based on Greek myths, and I'm an artist myself. Do you ever wonder if you ever learned to create a story that would show how Sarah the Triceratops would go on big adventures and learn from trips to museums from your work you did on Greek mythology? Would you ever want to compose a story about Sarah's adventures at a museum where all the exhibits come to life, like the
Sounds
night at the
pretty
museum?
cool. I would
He's a
not
plant
want.
from your publishing house.
I would want to make sure Sarah doesn't go to a museum of natural history because that would probably be very depressing. She would see some of her relative skeletons. Like, Mom, that would be a bummer. But if she could go to, like, say, the Met, and like that would be interesting to, like, you know, like we look at like this ancient art. Like, look, ancient Egypt. She's like, this is so recent. I'm 65 million years old. This was only like 5,000 years ago. It'd be cool. I'd be down for it. Anytime I could draw a Triceratops, I'm happy. So the only way that Winnie the Pooh could have been made better, because Winnie the Pooh is a perfect book. In fact, the 4 books in the series, I would dare say are all perfect. The only thing I can say is there was somehow a weird Triceratops in there, which just have delighted like little George even more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is for everyone. Which character do you think is most like?